business.com.
This is the morning brief from the Economic Times.
Since the beginning of this pandemic, one of the things that has become abundantly clear is the centrality of communication to our lives. Had this pandemic happened, say 50 years ago, with few avenues to carry on working from home or to coordinate our activities remotely, the world would have ground to a halt. Today, we are not just working remotely, but we are able to live and operate from anywhere in the world as long as we can be connected to the internet. This should mean the business that brings us voice and data connectivity, the telecom sector, should be thriving, right? Turns out, not so much. Today, we will try and find out why. From the Economic Times, I'm Shrutijit and this is the Morning Brief. The telecom sector has been in the news a whole lot in recent weeks. We had weeks of coverage over what was known as AGR dues. Then we saw the rebranding of Vodafone Idea into Vi. Then we heard about the marketing dollars telcos were sinking into the IPL. And then, of course, we learned about Vodafone winning the arbitration in the retrospective taxation amendment case with the Indian government. But if we telescope out and view the sector from a 3 to 5 year time horizon, we will see a picture of an industry that has witnessed tremendous disruption. To discuss this and understand the developments in the sector more closely, I invited my colleagues Romit Guha and Devina Sengupta on the podcast. Romit is ET's telecom editor based out of Delhi, and Devina is a Mumbai-based correspondent on the beat. Guys, thanks so much for joining us. Romit, let me come to you first. It's commonly understood that Jio has massively disrupted India's telecom sector. But could you take us through what specific ways has this happened? What are the specific ways in which Jio has disrupted the sector?
Thanks, SK, for having us. Jio entered the market in September 2016. Back then, all of us would be very wary of making voice calls and using data. Now, we don't bother about our voice rates. We don't bother about our data rates. We just use them.
Correct.
Simple reason being that voice calls are now practically free.
Right.
Data rates from over 250 rupees a GB are down to less than 10 rupees a GB on average.
Wow. And now I'm told we basically have the cheapest data rates in the world, right?
By far in the world,
right.
We do. Now, what this did was that the older players, Bharti Airtel and Vodafone Idea, they had to slash rates as well. Not just them, all the other players that were there in the market back then, Reliance Communications, Airtel, Uninor, Tata Teleservices,
right.
System Asham, just to name the players that we had back then. We had about 12 players. Now we have 3 private players plus 1 BSNL, which is merging with MTNL. The bottom line being here in all this is the consumers, however, have benefited.
Exactly. Yeah, I was going to come to that.
So while the telcos have had a hit, it's never been better for people like you and me.
Correct. But and that's indeed counterintuitive, right? I mean, if you had competition between 12 telcos one day, and if suddenly it was down to 3 telcos, one would imagine that what would happen is that things would get worse for the consumers, right? But that hasn't happened at all. And why is that?
So, see, before Jio entered the market, it was sort of a sweet spot for all the telecom companies who are existing, right?
Right.
They had figured out that there was no other option. If I am giving a GB of data for 250 rupees, then it's a take it or leave it for a consumer. And every player, they were tinkering, around those rates. But what Jio did was absolutely slash the rates.
Right.
What really hit the industry was that it made voice calling free.
Correct.
Because till then, voice was still 80% of the business, 85% of the business. Data was the rest. Now, even voice is data.
Absolutely. Can we talk about that a little bit? Why is it that Jio is able to do this? Is it because voice and data both travel over the same pipe in their technology as opposed to the others? How is it that they're able to do this so differently? And why is it that they've been able to disrupt the market so much?
So, well, the biggest reason there being that Jio has entered the market far later, right? Now, all the other telecom companies, including Airtel and Vodafone, they offered legacy technologies like 2G and 3G.
Correct.
Jio came in directly with 4G.
That's right.
Jio started offering voice also in data packets.
Right.
The other telecom companies had to invest. Where they had gone seriously wrong is that they could have used the 5 years, 6 years lead time
To upgrade their networks. Right?
to upgrade their networks.
Right.
They did not. And they were only reacting to what Jio did.
Right. Yeah, I mean, Jio is certainly a capital plus technology play, right? It's not an either or, right?
If you didn't have the capital, then there's no question of the kind of disruption and the staying power.
Correct.
Right.
Absolutely. Let me come to you now, Devina. We talked a little bit about how Jio has disrupted the market, both for consumers and for rivals. A lot of beneficial outcomes for consumers, not so much for its rivals, right? Now, can you talk a little bit about what has been the impact of the field of existing players? And now, of course, we only have two surviving telcos other than Jio in the market, Vodafone Idea, VI, now rebranded as VI. Tell us a little bit about what this has meant for them. Does this continue to be a battle for survival for them?
Thank you for the question, SK. Loosely put, last 3-4 years has been a bloodbath in the telecom sector. It's not just about giving cheap tariffs, it's also about sustaining. What is the point of giving you cheap tariffs and giving you the option of having a bill of just 300-400 from rupees 2000 when there is no network?
Yeah.
These are the questions that came up from the subscriber point of view. What will I do with my services when there is no network?
Correct.
So suddenly the top part of your mobile screen might show a 3G or 4G, but what is the point of having just those digits when there is absolutely no connectivity? These are the issues that came up in the telecom sector.
Correct.
Also, this has to be noted that the telecom sector, until the Jio platform managed to get its global investments, has been bleeding massively. It's not like the startup sector or the tech sector where you have massive global investments coming in.
Right.
And question which came up for the government is, why would anybody invest in the Indian telecom sector when there is so much of regulatory hassles? When there is a constant legal battle, why would anybody invest in this sector? And if you don't invest in the sector, how do you take it forward?
Absolutely.
So over the last 3 years, we've had exits, we've had insolvencies, we've had companies leaving the country, we've had global arbitrations, we've had a 16-year-old AGR battle, which almost got solved. There are still issues with it,
right,
which is just in 2020, which got solved. That is. So this is the state of the telecom sector over the last 3 to 4 years. And mind you, one very important thing is, let's not forget about the employees.
Absolutely.
More than 2 to 3 lakh employees have lost their job in the telecom sector. And that has happened over the last 3 years because of this massive consolidation.
Right. Devina, let me talk a little bit more about AGR. You mentioned the AGR issue. Could you take us through how this has been a pivotal issue in the telecom sector in recent years?
So AGR stands for Adjusted Gross Revenue. And this has been a bone of contention between the operators and the government for almost 2 decades now. It has gone through different courts of the country and finally it hit the Supreme Court on 24th of October. In a judgment that completely created havoc in the telecom sector, the court said everybody who is using a telecom license, which might include non-operators and also includes those which are not in existence anymore, they will have to pay their AGR dues. Suddenly, you have Bharti Airtel, Vodafone Idea, you have Tata Teleservices, you have various PSUs, you even have companies like Arcom and Airtel who are in insolvency, suddenly asked to pay a very heavy amount to the government. This battle went on for almost the entire 2020, starting from 2019 October onwards, where companies said that they're not in a position to pay the AGR dues. Insolvencies would get stopped. Also, what happened is finally between the court and the government, between the government and the telcos, they decided that okay, fine. The government said we are okay if the operators pay their money over a certain time frame. Now, what is that time frame? Should it be 15 years? Should it be 20 years? Should it be 10 years? The court has finally taken the call that AGR dues will be paid over a course of 10 years.
Right. So the scenario that is emerging in front of me during this very insightful conversation with the two of you is very bleak, actually, right? We have, massive AGR obligations on companies. We have quality issues. We have the uncertainty of the survival of some of the existing players. I mean, already down to a market of 3+1, 3 private players. And even within that, the survival of some of them being quite uncertain. We're looking at rather a bleak picture. Am I correct in my assessment, Promit?
Okay, so SK, there are two parts to it. It's a yes and a no. One, I'll just rewind just a bit back to the AGR issue. It's also prudent to note that the companies who have been affected by AGR, they knew all along that these dues are in court. None of them had bothered to provision adequately for these, right? So one, at this stage, can't be complaining because you had signed the license agreement fully knowing well what you are in for back in 2003 or 2004.
But it's a little bit more complicated than that, right? I mean, some argue that the licensing terms were vague and there was no reason for anybody to understand that non-telecom revenues would also come under the definition, right?
It was very clear in 2011 or 2012 that the telecom companies would need to pay substantial amount of dues. So the telecom companies knew fully well what they were in for.
Right.
They knew fully well. One can argue on the merits of the definition of AGR. One can argue that why should a telecom company be paying government levies on an income which is non-telecom? Right. That's a different debate altogether because then the government needs to change the definition of AGR, which is the growing chorus which is happening. A lot of people are, in fact, TRA had also recommended that that the definition of AGR be changed. That's a different argument. That's a different discussion topic altogether, because then that's where the government needs to step in and change it, right?
Correct. But and at any rate, even if they change it today, it cannot be applied retrospectively, right?
Exactly. That's done, right? Now, this AGR thing, how it is settled now, see, it'll play out over the next 10 years, and I think both the companies are quite happy that they've been able to get this
timing window, well, the window for
get this window. Coming to the future, SK, while things look bleak now, just imagine a market of the size of India, over 1 billion users. There are still about 400 to 450 million feature phone users. Okay, 400 million say feature phone users. Still, 3 players plus one BSNL serving an over 1 billion population market where data consumption is going through the roof and increasing every day. It is a market ripe for the taking for these companies who have survived. What is important is for consumers not to take the prices for granted.
Right.
Because a year down the line or 2 years down the line, things will be more expensive. Make no mistake about that.
It's interesting when you think about it, because when you look at all your monthly sort of fixed expenses, and I think in the last so many years, maybe the only thing that has come down is your telecom bill, right? Like everything else has only gone up. Right?
Exactly. But now think of the consumption patterns of an individual, of yours and mine, of the Netflixes and the Amazon Primes.
Yes.
Yes.
We will not give that up.
Absolutely.
And just to point out a very interesting sort of anecdotal information, as during the lockdown, one would automatically assume that most of the data consumption has happened in the urban areas, right? That's the normal way of thinking.
Right.
But if you look at the data says that the rural, the semi-urban areas of India have seen more of a data consumption jump than the urban areas.
Very interesting. Can we now talk about the issue of the arbitration award that Vodafone recently won? This has been a long-standing battle of wits and, obviously massive legal battle between the government and Vodafone has lasted many, many years and has become something of a, landmark case in terms of India's dealings with foreign investors, right? Can one of you take us through the history, the genesis of this particular arbitration and what the award means for the sector? And does it at all have any impact on the AGR dues that Vodafone Idea has to pay the Indian government? Will they get a little bit of liquidity out of this award back into the system, etc.?
So I'll take that one, SK.
Please.
So see, this basically started in 2007. Vodafone bought a controlling stake in Hutchison Whampoa, which was a Hutchison SR's majority partner, Hong Kong-based majority partner.
Right.
The deal size was roughly around $11 billion, slightly more than $11 billion. What had happened was they had structured the deal through a Vodafone entity based in the Cayman Islands, right? The government came in then and said that you may have structured the deal in Cayman Islands, but the underlying assets lie in India.
Right.
So Vodafone should have withheld tax, capital gains tax, from the transaction amount that it paid Hutchison and paid that amount to the government.
Right.
Right. The tax notice was served, I think, in 2009 or something. The total tax which was payable was determined to be somewhere around 11,000 crore, or slightly more than 11,000 crore.
Okay.
The penalty which was imposed was around 8,000 crore.
Right.
So the total thing became around a 20,000 crore tax demand. Right. Of course, Vodafone challenged that in the Bombay High Court. The court basically decided in favor of the tax authorities.
Right.
Vodafone went to the Supreme Court.
Right.
In 2012, January 20, the Supreme Court basically set aside the Bombay High Court ruling and basically said that Vodafone does not have to pay the tax. That was a big breather.
For Vodafone.
The story did not end there. The Indian government, which was at that point in time, the finance minister was Mr. Pranab Mukherjee, who's just passed away recently, amended an act which sought to tax all such deals which have been structured overseas. Not just that, they made the act applicable with retrospective effect.
Got it. What is the hope on the government side in terms of the revenues that they could get from 5G auctions?
I'll give you one small info. The price that the TRA has recommended for 5G in India is 8 times the price discovered for 5G auctions in Korea.
Wow.
All telcos have said that at these base prices, and you have to buy a minimum certain amount of 5G spectrum to make a viable business case. So each telco would need to spend something around 50,000 crore just to get pan-India 5G spectrum.
Right.
So it's an enormous amount of money that the telcos have clearly said, all telcos, and there's a unanimity amongst all 3 telcos, that it's too expensive. We just won't buy.
Right.
Which is one of the reasons why the 5G auctions have been delayed in the first place, right?
Right.
So basically, as the technology stands, for India, they've earmarked 3300 megahertz to 3600 megahertz, which is 3.3 to 3.6 gigahertz band for 5G auctions. Now, each telco needs to buy a certain amount of spectrum in this band for each circle to be able to give a decent 5G service.
Right.
For that, the amount that a telco needs to spend would be in upwards of rupees 50,000 crore. So this is basically the trade-off.
Divina, is there anything you want to add?
Yeah, SK, also, it's very important that we understand that in India, you also have a large chunk of subscribers who are still on 2G.
Sure.
So there are people who are still on that basic level of network. Right. And it is going to take a lot of time for them to upgrade to a 3G and then a 4G. Right. And here you are asking for 5G. I mean, it's great if you want to innovate and all, but can you imagine the disparity and that comes in between the segments? A certain section has access to 5G, another whole section is completely unaware and is still on 2G. No, so these are the things that operators are obviously aware of.
Romit, is there any market, any telecom market in the world where 3 generations of technology they coexist in simultaneously?
Yes, there are.
Okay.
There are other markets. But what's happening in India is that, interestingly, 3G, the investments into 3G have practically been a waste for the telecom operators. So they had paid enormous amount of money to buy the 3G spectrum in 2010.
Right.
But they didn't get enough time to monetize their investments because Jio held with 4G, right?
Right.
So they had to quickly upgrade to 4G. Now what both Vodafone and Airtel are doing is that they are shutting down their 3G services, using that, freeing up that spectrum to offer 4G. Because 4G obviously means more data, which means more revenue, right? So in effect, India, unlike most other markets in the world, has basically sort of given 3G a pass.
Fascinating developments indeed. In what was deemed a sunshine sector a decade back, it's now a dangerous whirlpool and perhaps brighter days are ahead. That's it from us today. I'm Shrudhajit from The Economic Times. This episode was edited by Devina Sengupta and coordinated by Shashwat Mohanty. The Morning Brief appears Tuesday, Thursday and Friday every week. You can write to us with feedback at themorningbrief@timesgroup.com. You have a nice day ahead.
Avaz.com